So we're going to move to the second pillar, financial well-being. So do you think that money buys happiness? What's the impact of financial security in your life? So financial security has much more influence in your overall well-being than income alone. Yet we very often spend a lot of our day looking at buckets, expense buckets, medical, cost, reserve, weekly wage. But can we view compensation through a slightly different lens? We welcome Marques Torbert to the stage to find out. Marques is the Chief Executive Officer at Ametros Financial, Inc. This is a leading professional administration company that provides products and services to help injured workers manage and save money in their post-settlement funds. Ametros provides services that help injured workers navigate healthcare and compliance, particularly in the area of Medicare set-asides and in non-Medicare funds. Marques has worked on Wall Street as an investor, as an advisor, and as a strategist. He's been an investment banker in New York, where he worked on mergers and acquisitions and has advised boards of directors. He, in fact, serves as on the board of director at Merrimack College in his beloved Cleveland, Ohio. He has a BA in economics from Columbia University and an MBA from Harvard Business School. We are proud to call Marques to the stage for his story of humanity in workers' compensation.
All right. Thanks, Greg. Appreciate it. So, I'm going to take us back to the early 1900s for a second, where the grand bargain really began. As many of you know, it is the foundation of our workers' compensation system. And the bargain was ultimately meant to create or provide limited but reasonably protected benefits for injured workers in exchange for immunity from tort liability for employers, right? And what was so great about this bargain was that ultimately all of the stakeholders were supposed to benefit and gain. Employers would ultimately gain the ability to have a predictability on a fully insured claim with immunity from the tort liability system. Insurance carriers were going to gain because they now would have access to an entire market where they could make profits, so not bad for them either. And lastly, injured workers would ultimately gain because they would have guaranteed lifetime benefits without realizing who was at fault. So when you look at this system, it was really meant to be a win-win for all parties. However, what's ultimately intrigued me over the past few years is that the discussion around workers' compensation has largely been a discussion around the economic incentives and the adequacy of benefits for injured workers. And because of this focus we have on the financial outcome and economics of workers' compensation, we've kind of created a system of distrust that we have here, right? And so while we talk a lot about economic adequacy, what we don't spend a lot of time talking about is the humanistic aspect of the system. And that brings me to Xavier. So, Xavier was an injured worker that settled his case a year ago. And for those of you, I'm sure Greg gave a little intro, is that Ametros helps injured workers manage their healthcare needs once they've chosen to settle the medical portion of their workers' compensation case. And in many situations, it's the continuation of the same care they were receiving prior to the case settling, with a little bit of added freedom and less restrictions that are involved in the system. So Xavier was very, very excited about settling his case, moving on to his new life where he could treat the way that he wanted with some added support and advocacy along the way. So a little bit of background on Xavier. He had no family. He was completely alone at home. He lived in one of the roughest neighborhoods in Chicago, and his injury had changed his life forever. And to make matters worse, several weeks after he settled his case, he was robbed. People had found out that he'd received a sizable settlement and naturally assumed that he would have cash and other valuables laying around. So they broke into his home, they stole his medical scooters, cash, other valuables, things that Xavier needed now really more than ever, right? A couple of weeks after this incident, Xavier was scheduled to have a surgery, a procedure that he'd been wanting to have for some time now, right? Luckily, the surgery went extremely well and Xavier recovered. But what happened next was something that should not have surprised me, but indeed nonetheless. I received a call from Xavier, and calmly on the other end of the phone, he was requesting that we send flowers to the hospital. So flowers, huh, I thought. And it turned out that Xavier was alone. He had no family. And so he saw that everyone else in the hospital had flowers, and he would like some as well. Makes sense, right? Well, kind of. The first response was, we're definitely not a florist, and we're not a flower delivery company, so I'm not sure where this relationship is going to go in the long run. And secondly, Medicare set-asides definitely don't cover flowers, right? So we're in a little bit of a quagmire here. But nonetheless, flowers were sent to Xavier. He was able to receive them, didn't have to pay for them. It was sort of a gesture given some of the things that he'd gone through recently in his life. And words cannot do justice to the phone call that was received several days later from Xavier. The excitement, enthusiasm, and happiness on the other end of the phone. And what we realized was that what seemingly was a very small gesture, nonchalantly giving someone flowers from a company's perspective, had been a profound, life-changing experience for Xavier. We made him feel appreciated. We made him feel respected. We made him feel valuable. But most importantly, we made him feel human, right? And you can imagine now the collaboration that came from that interaction with Xavier, and something that really evolved out of us not trying to do it at all. We noticed that he was collaborative in his own healthcare. He communicated better, and he was really, really intent on getting well and getting better because of the relationship we developed. So what that means for others, right? We thought. We started looking at other injured workers that we'd work with and thought, what are some of the benefits of this humanistic approach that we discovered that we're taking with these folks? And the first was very apparent, it should be easy for all of us, is that it was the right thing to do. It was the right thing to do for someone who'd encountered and experienced an unimaginable outcome in their lives. And it's the right thing to do for folks that we share a very, very sincere common bond with in this world, and that's humanity. The second thing that became very, very apparent is that there were financial implications out of it. Naturally, because Xavier was happier, there had been less distrust, less friction, less of him not wanting to really work on himself, and more proactiveness about how can he get better, about making sure he could become a happier, healthier, and more productive person. And those were all great things that came out of this. So a pilot test started to emerge. We started sending flowers to a subset of every person who joined the program, everyone who had a complicated surgery or procedure, every person who may have lost a home from a natural disaster, the kind that we're seeing here today, to really build that bridge and that connectivity with our injured workers. And for any of you who've read the book Drive by Daniel Pink, he goes into great detail describing the motivation behind individuals and describing what are the drivers behind that motivation. And he really talks about three main drivers of motivation. The first is sort of the carnal biological driver, right? So think survival, think to eat, procreate, caveman style stuff, right, that we all have that's innately in us. The second motivation, however, is really based on external factors, external rewards and punishment, things that lead us to have an economic incentive in things. Think about our work comp system. I don't like a doctor you go to, I will force you into an MPN or a restricted network. I don't like the drugs that you take, I will punish you with drug utilization review, right? However, the third driver that Daniel talks about in a lot more detail and that he thinks we're missing in this world is an intrinsic internal motivator, something that's absent any of those external factors, those external rewards and punishments. Consider someone taking control of their own medical care and their own destiny is really what he's focused on. And what I've come to realize is that something I think we've all already known. The same things that motivate all of us in this room and want us to do better internally are the exact same things that motivate injured workers. The feeling of freedom, the feeling of consideration from others, the feeling of being respected, all the things that make us human. So, I look at everyone here today and I say, what can we do to help evolve the grand bargain? And yes, without a doubt, there are some serious economic incentives that we all must consider. But what's missing? What's missing where we can do better? We can do better to have a better outcome for everyone involved. And so the next time, hopefully, that we have an injured worker that calls us who's frustrated and having a bad day, an injured worker who had a complication in their surgery or procedure, an injured worker that lost their home, loved ones in a natural disaster, consider sending them flowers or a nice note. Consider making them feel human again in this very economically motivated and complex system that we call workers' comp. And you might just get a better outcome and a better result as well. Thank you.